law did go up in fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, not surprisingly in Soviet Russia. And qualitatively, these countries often were brought back executions or relied more heavily on executions. Okay, well, I want to begin to leave off on Durkheim, but I do want to mention briefly some of the criticisms that have been mounted over the years of Durkheim's theory, just so that you're more aware of them. It's often argued that Durkheim overstates the level of consensus in society. This notion that we have this social solidarity that holds us together is often contrasted with Marxist social theory, for instance, which emphasizes class divisions, or say contemporary social theory coming from critical race theory or feminism that makes us aware of profound cleavages around gender identity, around race and nationality. I think this criticism has some basis, but I think it's more accurate to see Durkheim as somebody who was aware of that. After all, he had been through the Dreyfus affair, but who thought that the most important point a sociologist at that point in history could make is we do share a lot of values in modern French society, even though we have diverse religions. And think of it today when there's so much continuing political strife in France, now not so much because of Jews, but because of the rise of a Muslim population, which is often viewed in the same hostile and antagonistic way that Jews were at the beginning of the 20th century in France and other European countries. Clearly, Durkheim misunderstood the relationship between European civilization and its colonial others. His whole story about primitive and modern society is hopelessly tainted by colonialism, by the forms of archaeological and anthropological knowledge that were being channeled through colonialism to him, and you can just kind of chuck that whole part of Durkheim out. It's a good example. Sometimes in science, as in life, we kind of come to the right conclusions from the wrong premises that can happen. And what I would say is that his theory of history is not very helpful, but his theory of modernity and its as well as his theory of law, it has a lot of continuing value. As we move into our own study of the modern penal forms and penal systems, we're going to be aware that one thing that we don't get from Durkheim is a very helpful set of tools for studying the actual form that punishment takes. In a general sense, of course, he's told us that there's this qualitative shift, but for instance, he tells us that the prison is simply a less physical form of punishment. He has nothing to say about the distinctive qualities of prison as a form of punishment. He has nothing to say about the social organization of punishment, although we might be able to apply some of his ideas there. And finally, although I think he's aware that the state is not an unproblematic representative of the social consciousness, common consciousness, he's not particularly adept in his writing at kind of being sophisticated about the political field itself and how it may shape penal logics and life. The two things I think I want to leave you off with about Durkheim, his toolkit, his theory remains, I think, vital to understanding two things. One, why crime continues to exert such a powerful hold on our imagination. Right? If you turn on television and treated not our legal code, but our television schedule as a kind of model or pictogram of our social solidarity, you would think that penal issues and penal laws, fears about crime, make up a disproportionate, if not majority amount of it. There, for a long time, has dominated now television and the internet, earlier novels, magazines, etc. The example I offer you here, maybe it's already begun to fade in California memory, but in the middle of the last decade, right around the time I moved back to California, the disappearance of Lacey Peterson and her eventual discovery that she'd been murdered. Ultimately, her husband, Scott Peterson, was accused and convicted of murder and sentenced to death. The case generated a huge wave of interest, not only in California and the Bay Area, but around the country. And it's an example. You can think of more current examples, clearly. But the point is, why do figures like Scott Peterson draw so much of our attention at a time when you might think, well, he killed somebody, death is a big deal. Well, what else happened in the decade? We had 9/11, we had the Iraq War. There's no shortage of death going on. So why this intense attention to Scott Peterson? Many social theorists would be inclined to say it's an example of how ideologically oriented people are. That they're responding not necessarily to what's most important in their world, but to what the organs of the media and other kinds of ideological control lead them to. And we're going to explore ideology because that's another valuable toolkit. But Durkheim points to another way of understanding this, which is not to see it as a false or deceptive or distorted reflection, but instead to see it as reflecting a truth about us. And that is the truth that our response to crime is profound and powerful and something that's in many ways not something we choose. It's part of our basic moral sensibility that comes along with our sense of self. And what he says here is a crime, and he may well be thinking about a particularly heinous crime like the Lacey Peterson murder. When an event like that happens, it disturbs these feelings that we're not used to having, especially because they're so powerful, emotional, hot feelings that generally we don't have, or at least not often. But the fact that we have them isn't a sign of some kind of ideological distortion to Durkheim that outweighs the significance, that overvalues their significance. It's a reflection of the fact that these acts profoundly offend these deepest moral common values that, as he puts it, are to be found in every healthy consciousness. And that would certainly be true in an event like 9/11 as well. But for instance, death in war may not generate the same kind of emotional response. Durkheim would not be surprised. Finally, as we know from his study of penal evolution, Durkheim could be very useful in trying to understand change in penal patterns over time. Here's something we've already looked at. It's almost the reverse of Durkheim's kind of leniency pattern that he was describing in the 19th and early 20th century. We have a kind of escalating level of punishment, at least quantitatively. And I would argue if you look at Brown versus Plata and what we now know about conditions in California prisons, that there's a qualitative severity to our punishments as well. And I think Durkheim, I'm not going to try to do it now because we have the rest of the course to use this toolkit to begin to analyze this problem, but I want to get you thinking about it. And again, a great topic for paper topics is to try to use Durkheim to look at both macro long-term patterns of change, but also perhaps more specific reforms or more short-term change. Okay, I want to move on to lecture 6. So I'm going to have to speed speak in some way, or I'll come back to what I don't get to next week. But let me just stop at least for a brief moment and ask you if I can answer any questions about Durkheim. Okay, well, let me try to. This is going to be one of several different, like at least the next 3 classes, which we're essentially going to be looking at the scaffold, which was the core of, the prison is the core of our penal imagination today and our penal practices. Even though, as we've seen, most people aren't in prison or jail, they're in things like probation, parole. Nonetheless, just as probation, parole sort of operate like moons in a way, circulating around prison as the center, the core, parole being a penalty or a sanction that comes after prison, probation in lieu of prison, but you can end up getting sent to prison if you violate it. The scaffold, the site of physical punishments, including executions, was, until about the middle of the 19th century, the core of both the penal imagination and penal practice. Today, I want to talk about what happened in a very descriptive sense, the patterns of what happens on the scaffold and around it. On Tuesday, I'll probably finish the rest of this lecture, and then I want to talk about the political, sort of what to make. How do we understand the scaffold? What was it for? Its particular forms and qualities. And on Thursday of next week, we'll kind of look at the crisis of the scaffold, how in the course of the 19th century, beginning really in the 18th century, it came to seem increasingly problematic. And by the end of the 19th century, public executions and other forms of public physical punishment had disappeared largely in Europe, as well as in sort of Europe's primary satellite societies, including North America and Australia. So just as the prison centers our penal world, but doesn't form the largest, it's not the modal form of punishment, execution on the scaffold was sort of the main enchilada in terms of understanding what the scaffold ritual was about, but it was not by far the commonest punishment. Instead, many of the things that happen on the scaffold, here you can see a scaffold essentially any structure built to essentially operate and display a practice of physical or degrading punishment. Here is somebody in a pillory, which I'm sure you've seen versions of. Essentially, it's similar to the one that I was in the Edinburgh Museum, although that was for the legs, this one is for the arms. But again, we can see that a number of things in the slide. Lots of people are watching us, both from buildings around and from the street. There's a line of soldiers here, and you'll see these in many of the pictures. Obviously, they're there partly to keep the crowd back and to control the crowd, something we're going to pay a lot of attention to next week. They're also there, of course, to be a symbolic representative as well of the state and the sovereign, the monarch. They may be there in part as well to protect the person in the pillory. Obviously, this could become a lethal punishment if people were to begin to throw, say, heavy objects at the person in the pillory, and depending perhaps on their attitude toward this offender, the soldiers might or might not do something to stop that. But the key thing about this kind of punishment is not primarily its physical painfulness, although it probably was quite painful to be locked in there for a number of hours, but the publicness of it and the involvement of the crowd. The punishment wouldn't have been just the fact of being locked in there. It would have been the catcalls and worse that you're getting from the crowd. So this is very much about humiliation and sort of personal, interpersonal degradation. A very common punishment in all through Europe was branding. Again, a physical punishment, often in the English common law courts. And today we're going to mostly talk about England and Scotland, a little bit about Amsterdam and the Netherlands in a moment. But in England, in common law courts, you would be branded right in court. I mean, this was usually as an alternative to being sent to the gallows or being transported later. So you were getting a real break. And it was called benefit of clergy. We'll study it. We'll talk about it a little bit later how you got it. But the punishment part of this involved a branding on the meaty part of your thumb. And that had two functions. One, it was physically painful. Obviously, it took place in a public setting where your flesh is being seared in front of other people. That again creates this possibility of humiliation and a sense of being degraded. But also, you might think of it from a more utilitarian point of view. It was a way of identifying people who had already received what was essentially a second chance punishment, right? So if you come back with another felony and you've got one of these burns on your meaty part of your thumb, it probably means you're not going to get another break, and you may well go to the gallows. Some punishments lacked altogether the physically painful dimension, but no doubt were psychologically terrifying. This kind of swinging the sword over the head was often, and this is a scene from Germany, but was often used for people who had been charged with a potentially capital crime like murder, on a finding that, well, it wasn't really as bad as a murder. Let's think of it more as a manslaughter. That's also similar to the benefit of clergy. Branding would have also been a possible punishment. But notice, unlike being branded, here he's not receiving any physical injury, but we still have the crowd. We have the physical threat, the intimidation of having the knife, and sometimes, perhaps, the person wouldn't know for sure what they would face. They might be coming out to the scaffold, being told that they're about to be executed, and instead receive this reprieve and a symbolic waving of the sword over the head, which would have had a profound psychological shock aspect. Well, let's talk a little bit about Peter Spierenberg's wonderful book on called Written in Blood. Essentially, he calls it Fatal Attraction in Enlightenment Amsterdam. It's actually a great read. He basically tells two murder stories from real stories from 18th century Amsterdam, and one of them, the one I'm going to share with you today, involves a guy named Nathaniel Donkers, who was from a well-born family, and he pissed off his well-born parents by marrying somebody they thought of as below him. But then he compounded things by falling in love with a prostitute, leaving his already not terribly well-born wife, and eventually, in a conspiracy with his new partner, former prostitute, murdered his wife. They attempted to hide the body. It was a pretty interesting kind of murder mystery, forensics. How do you discover who did this, who this person even is in this time without fingerprints, let alone DNA testing, etc. And eventually they found Donkers. One of the features of European continental criminal procedure that was not practiced, at least in civilian courts in England, was judicial torture, but this was an integral part of the procedure on the continent. Now, this was prior to conviction, so it's technically not a punishment, but it's important to see that even before the punishment, even before finding of guilt, the sort of focus on the body, the attack on the body, is an integral part of the way this justice system is working. There's clearly a punitive element to this, even though it's designed to produce information or evidence. We might think of it as, in a way, saying just being accused of a crime like this is such a bad thing that essentially you deserve this. What I'm showing you there are actually images that don't apply to Amsterdam. I think this is from the Inquisition. I'm not sure. I think this is Italian, judging from the hats. I'd say Renaissance period. Notice that they're essentially waterboarding a person. They're essentially holding their nose and pouring water down their throat in a way that would mimic and perhaps cause asphyxiation. Here you get a feeling for what they actually did. The Dutch method was to use, among other things, shin screws. They would put your legs, in a brace, and then start tightening a screw that would begin to, eventually crack your bone if they kept going. Donkers was apparently something of a lightweight. I'm not to judge him because I don't think I would last long in this method either. But the prisoners brought in again undressed. Again, there's a degrading feature of being undressed, placed on the bench, tied up with the shin screws, and they hadn't even begun to tighten them on Donkers when he confessed that he had murdered, in fact, and violently took the life of his wife. Well, he's sentenced to death. And this is the specific sentence announced by the judge, and you begin to see that there's a very detailed, even at this time of scaffold execution, there's lots of different ways to be executed, and different countries have different approaches. As we'll see, hanging is the main thing, the leading, I think maybe the exclusive form of execution in England. But what's very popular on the continent is what's known as breaking on the wheel, or is often spoken of as breaking on the wheel, or just breaking, or being broken. That the prisoner should be laid on a cross, which is often a wheel, that's why it's called breaking on the wheel, but it's essentially a cross as well, on the scaffold and broken alive from below, his body exposed on the scaffold for some time, then placed on a hurdle and dragged to the gallows field on a peninsula at the other side of the harbor, exposed on a wheel to be eaten by birds and consumed by the air. So you'll see that this is a punishment that, to call it a death penalty is almost the wrong term, right? Because death is just part of it. It begins before death, indeed it begins before conviction, and it lasts after death, including the humiliation of having your body exposed. And again, these took place in very public settings. How many of you have visited Amsterdam? So surely you've been in Dam Square, wandering around in front of the giant train station, which you don't see here about the city hall here. You walked a few blocks from that train station, and you might have seen a rock concert, perhaps, if you were there in the summer, Well, if you'd been there in the era of Nathaniel Donkers, they didn't have rock concerts. They're a very religious society, but they didn't lack for entertainments. In the very place that you would see a rock concert today, they had set up, this isn't actually the scaffold, this was actually a structure on which the leading elites of the city, the burgomeisters, would essentially come out to preside over the execution. I want to read you a bit of the, again, more from the sentencing speech that was read to Donkers, because it gives you a feeling of how deeply religiously oriented this world is. And I'll try to sound like an ominous Dutch judge from the 18th century. Thus you see, Donker, how divine providence watches over you, allowing the earthly judge to have you punished and get what you deserve. Not only this, but in a moment you will be summoned before an almighty judge. I'm sorry, this is the speech not at his sentencing, because he's sentenced and then he has like 6 months until he actually gets executed. This is the speech that they're reading from, that scene. They're up there reading this while he's probably already tied up to the wheel. In a moment you're going to be in front of the almighty judge, whom you cannot deceive and to whom you will have to give account for everything you have done or failed to do. When you contemplate the Trinitarian God in his holiness and righteousness, it would appear there is no hope left for you, and you have to exclaim as Cain in desperation, my sins are too grave to be pardoned, but believe in the great God who in Jesus Christ, his dear Son, has conceived of a road toward reconciliation, through which he promises forgiveness to the most evil sinners and from whom you too can acquire forgiveness. So you can imagine a number of functions to that such a speech. It clearly lays a primarily religious marker on the meaning of this occasion, but we might also think of it as, to some extent, an effort to persuade the person about to experience the punishment to cooperate as much as possible with what's going to be a pretty painful experience. I'll skip that part of the speech. So this is what breaking on the wheel would have looked like to the people in the crowd on Dam Square. They would have seen a figure tied to that cross or wheel. Notice the priest or minister who's ministering to them. And then the executioner, who in this system would have been holding essentially a large rod. And the point of breaking was that they would basically use this rod to break the bones in your body. And I'll have to check into detail. I think starting from below meant that they would turn you over and beat you on this side. And why might they do that? Why might they do that? What would be the point of beating you from below, from this side? I think you're right, especially about the second part. There's plenty of humiliation in this whole thing, but I'm not sure that having your butt turned up was the most humiliating part of this. So I think you're right. It's to have all this meat and fat here to prevent to keep this going longer. It would have taken a long time if you wanted to die quickly in this kind of execution. And here's how it would have looked to the person. If you had been on the stage, maybe like the minister. Here, this person's being attacked from the front side. Notice that if what would be the most merciful thing to do? Break his face or neck, attack the head, basically, because that's going to do the most damage, put you unconscious the most quickly. Instead, a properly done, or for somebody that was considered a heinous criminal, they might begin, and just work their way up. Break all the bones in your legs, then move up to your ribs, etc. So this would not be a quick event by any means. One can hope that some kind of bodily chemicals begin to reach your brain to take you out of that situation. In any event, following, after a period of being exposed on the scaffold, notice the first person who's been executed, his bones are all broken there. He's going to spend some time up there just being observed, and then he'll be brought to the gallows fields. Unlike in England, these people weren't actually hung to kill them. These were hung as corpses. But this would have been a place that you could take your kids for a picnic outside of the city on a nice day like today, and to show them what happens to people who don't pay attention in church. And to admit, it would have been a pretty compelling lesson. Skeletal remains sitting up there, birds pecking away at it, etc. Okay. I promised some analysis next week, but I just want to mostly gross you out today. So let's move on to bloody England. And England is the land of the gallows. And in this actually very famous and quite witty kind of political cartoon of the 18th century, you see the ironic phrase "Merry England" beneath what was for many critics of the English political regime the bloodiness of the English capital punishment system. You see not just the figure of the scaffold itself and the gallows, but the judge. When judges obviously wear their wigs, was a part of and remains a part of English judicial costumery. The black cap was put on only for purposes of capital sentencing. So there's a lot of ritualizing. If you were going to be sentenced to death in court, the judge would actually put that black cap on, and you could see what was coming, basically. Now this just shows you quantitatively that the English, earning this suffragette, Merry England, did a lot of hangings, actually, or a lot of executing, a lot more than on the continent. As you can see in Berlin, you might have seen a couple of executions per decade at the end of the 18th century. In Paris, a bit more. But in London, during that that same 3-year period in which 37 were executed in Paris, 139 in England. In the chapter you read today from Gatrell's excellent book, I think he estimates that somebody having a whole lifespan in London from, what do you say, like 1760 to 1820 would have seen somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 or 800 executions. Right? Just to put that in perspective, I've been either living in or paying close attention to this state for over 40 years, during which time there have been 13 executions. And obviously, there are other parts of the country where there are more, but they're minuscule compared to this level. So in a way, when you come to the death penalty to study it as we did on the second day of class, the lethal injection, the American death penalty system, you're seeing a very different beast than this death penalty. And part of the reason it's a different beast is that it's just quantitatively not very important today. It's a tiny, largely symbolic part of our system. This is not symbolic. Not that it's lacking in symbolism. It's dripping with symbolism. But it's also a very common and very real kind of thing. The other thing to keep in mind is that people didn't swing, as the phrase was used, just or even primarily for homicide or murder, which is the exclusive capital crime in the United States today and most other countries that retain the death penalty. These were crimes that could commonly get you executed in the 1700s. Crimes like stealing horses or sheep, destroying roads, cutting down trees, pickpocketing, being out at night, these kinds of things. Not to mention arson, etc. Here are some of the